everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 7 of the extended edition of Psychopaths. We're on this episode, and this would be episodes 13 and 14 of the original season. Yeah, last episode, we basically rounded out the halfway point of the season with Makishima killing Akane's friend. Isn't that nice? And then we had a really good episode. The second half of it was dealing with Kunazuka and her backstory. I'm so excited that we're getting backstory on these characters. I don't know if we will get a Kogami backstory because they kind of already explained his backstory, that he was a kid when he was basically determined to be a latent criminal. And then maybe they'll give us something with him getting taken in to be an enforcer. They might do that. I'm more interested at this point in seeing Shion's backstory, if we get that, and then seeing Masaoka, because I think that there is something to Masaoka and Ginoza's relationship that has not been explored yet. We kind of get the gist of it. We kind of get how that relationship is. We know little bits and pieces, but there's more to it that I think is hidden underneath the surface, and I'm just waiting for this series to decide whether or not it's going to show it to us. But Kunazuka, she's a very quiet and calm, stoic character. She's not the type that is going to vocalize what her backstory is, so it makes sense that we had to see it here. So I've got a couple comments before we dive into this episode. Sunray brought up some really cool stuff about, I know the band BTS. I know of them. I don't know them. But their comment for episode 4 kind of went into detail about a certain line from it that I thought was really interesting. They also talked about how the robot dogs that Senguji used were akin to the mechanical dogs in Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's story, that were used to hunt rats, which seem a very interesting tie. I wouldn't be surprised if the two dogs were named Lovecraft and Bradbury. Wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but I thought that was a pretty cool connection. So thank you, Sunray. Sunspots, differently, also said that I apparently said with derision Beowulf 16 times. Well, now y'all know my trigger word. If you mention Beowulf, I'm likely to go off, but what can we do? And also, I thought this is interesting, talking about Kunazuka. I like Sunspots had a really cool thing on Patreon in their comment talking about how, Kunazuka is very quiet and resolved, but it has some barriers put up there. But around people like Kagura and Shion, she seems to kind of drop those barriers with people she's really comfortable with. So I think that's really cool. And I like the idea that Kunazuka is a very calm and decisive person under pressure. And that's something you kind of have to be as an enforcer. And to kind of go along with Sunspot's comment, Kunazuka is kind of an interesting contrast to Sasayama. We saw both of them in the last episode. Sasayama's kind of a jerk and kind of an impulsive asshole, which is fine. But Kunazuka is kind of a contrast to that, whereas Sasayama was like gung-ho, go all in, guns a-blazing, think later, act now. Kunazuka kind of is a more kind of methodical person thinking things out before they act. And so I think that's nice. It's a nice way to show that not all the enforcers are operating on the same level. Because on the surface, they're all enforcers, they're all dogs, they all seem on the surface like they're the same, they're a latent criminal. But then once you get under the surface, you see how different Kunazuka is from Kagari, who's different from Kogami, who's different from Masaoka, who's different from Shion. So I thought that was really interesting. And then Anime Annie had a couple comments. They noted, one, that the blood that could have been in the mechanical units could have been type AB, which is the universal blood type that you can give to anyone in emergencies until they can get to the hospital and get the blood type they need. That is probably the most logical thing that's happening. They probably don't carry a blood sample of each type. They just have AB and then put it in you and then take you to the hospital and get a transfusion of the type that you need. That makes more sense. That makes much more sense. But also they talked about how I agree totally with Anime Annie's comment that what I like is, despite the trauma that Akane goes through, I like that Kogami wasn't like this white knight that showed up to rescue her, or that she was portrayed as a damsel in distress. If anything, I love that when he kind of like touches her out there when he's in the stretcher and she's just sobbing, he touches her and it's kind of like a way for him to be like, hey, I know what you're going through. Went through the same thing. But because he knows that, he's not going to patronize her or try to chastise her in that moment, because he knows exactly what that feels like. So I thought that was really nice. I liked that a lot. Sasayama, he may be a jerk, as we find out in the last episode, but he doesn't seem to try, she was noting this, he doesn't seem to try to flirt with Kunozuka, maybe because he realizes that she's a lesbian and is into women, but I kind of like that. We talked about how the one trope that's kind of frustrating is when a guy's like, well, she's a lesbian until she's met me, and I'm like, or she's just not into dicks. It's a thing. Don't know if you've heard of it, but I kind of like that Sasayama, for being as much of a womanizer and kind of a jerk that he is, he knows his boundaries, so that's good to note. Now, whether or not he's tried to flirt with Shion, I mean, she's kind of the same way, but maybe we'll find out. Maybe he learned his lesson after trying to flirt with Shion, and she was like, no, and then he was like, right? And then finally, blowing my mind, Rena, who was the girl band leader of the Resistance, Rena's VA from the last episode is known for playing the young versions of lots of characters you may have heard of. Her voice actress has played young Midorima from My Hero Academia, has played young Suzaku, as well as Valletta from Code Geass, has played Hallie from Death Note, has played young Reen, and this blew my mind because I'm such a Free fan, Free Iwatobi Swim Club, young Reen and his sister Go. I was like, oh, Reen and Go are brother and sister in Free, and she played the younger version of him before his voice dropped as Reen and became Miyano Mamoru, and then played the sister Go. I'm like, that's so genius to have voice actors play the younger version of the brother and the sister. Stroke of genius. Blew my mind. Loved that. Oh, and Rena's VA also plays Hitch from Attack on Titan. So, what a winner. What a winner voice actress in my book. Good on you, girl. But thank you all so much for your comments, for your kind words. I really appreciate it. I am absolutely loving this series. It is checking off all the boxes, and I cannot adore to love. I love thrillers, I love crime noir, I love sci-fi, I love romance and shipping, and this series is just chick, and I love Shakespearean villains, and what a Shakespearean villain Makishima is. Anime Annie was like, he gives off what the Americans deem as British villain energy. I was like, he's just a mustache away. He's a mustache twirling away from being that kind of villain, and I'm kind of here for it, so I'm all about it. My dog is acting like I should throw something, and thus I will. But I'm excited, y'all, to dive into this episode. We took a detour after Akane's best friend died to talk about Kunozuka's backstory, but I have a feeling we're gonna have to go back to the main plot. It was nice to detour and get some levity after that bloodbath, but we've got to figure out, where does Akane go to from here? And so with that being said, go lay down. Probably won't. We're gonna find out what happens. So we're gonna watch episode 7 of Psycho-Pass Extended Edition, and we're gonna do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Aha! Welcome to this week's edition of Shogo's Book Club, where this pretentious mofo decides to try to school us on the literature he's reading and the fun philosophical things that he knows that he has to mansplain to his Korean friend Cho. Oh my god, I feel like every episode of Psycho-Pass I watch, I just need to form a book club and be like, clearly Shogo's reading all the great pieces of literature out there. Although, Kogami gets entry into this week's Shogo's book club because, I mean, Shogo would let Kogami into his book club. He just would. But we're going to talk about the 3 pieces of literature that are brought up specifically in these 2 episodes, but whew, there was a lot of monologuing, there was a lot of things being discussed, there were some reveals, we finally get confirmation, thank God that we finally get the Ginoza and Masaoka are father and son. Oh my God, thank you. I was waiting for it, I was like, is that, because here's the thing, they basically, throughout this entire series, have made it to where Ginoza is like, my father's latent criminal, and the other members of the task force, the enforcers, they don't bring it up, because they're like, this is family business, and we are not about to get in between Ginoza and his dad. Nope. But I think it's really important to point out that it's like Ginoza joining the division with his father. Did he join that division? Was he assigned to it? That's a heavy hand in itself, but the fact that Ginoza goes by his mom's name, and that's something too. When I'm looking at things from a Western perspective, here in the United States, very, very, very rarely do you keep the mom's name, the maiden name, when you get married and you have a kid. So, unless you get divorced or unless the kid's adopted. So, I mean, is Ginoza Masaoka's biological child, or did he adopt Ginoza? I'm thinking that they're biological, and Ginoza just looks like his mom, and Masaoka just doesn't look like him at all, because like their eye color, hair color, everything about them is different. But I've met a lot of people who don't look like their dads as guys, so very believable. But I should have put two and two together that in Japan you can take the mom's maiden name, so that makes sense. But so we get this whole thing starting out with Ginoza confirming, saying when he was a child, we might as well just dive right into it. When he was still a child, he followed his father to an abolition block where something was being freed, right? And I do like the way that this like office is set up. Like everything's it's all very open. I love the like mosaic, the glass lamp and everything. Everything's just all like, it's basically just like they're reclaiming a bunch of things. And it shows him at this desk with this computer, and there's something under the cover, like it's a motorcycle or something. It looks like a motorcycle or something. He's like, as for why we ended up going there, I don't remember the details. Okay. But little baby Ginoza, I remember him saying something like, what did he say here? We're in a bit of a fix right now, so we'll have to stay in a safe house. Oh, okay. So we don't exactly know why Ginoza and his dad were hiding out, right? We don't know at this point, was his mom dead? Had she passed? And he was just left an orphan and taken in? Like, what was the situation? We don't exactly know. The moment we saw him in the shadows, I was like, oh, that's Masaoka. So, it's interesting to see, is like, what are we doing? And I don't exactly know what Masaoka is doing. He's just telling him what's going to have to go down. I thought for a hot second, I thought that maybe it was Kogami that was the little kid there, because the way his hair kind of is, it's not all grown out like Ginoza's is now. And I wonder if part of the reason Ginoza grows his hair out is so that he can look very different from Masaoka. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. But he says, in a foreign room, in a foreign place, he showed me a gun. Which is, to show a little kid a gun is interesting, but in the world of psychopaths where things are so desensitized and to the point where there's no sense of like danger or anything like that, I can kind of see why Masaoka did it. But him saying it was as if he felt he didn't have much choice, since there weren't any toys a kid could play with. Which also Masaoka kind of has like a sort of warped dad personality, so I could kind of see him doing this. I like that even in the shadows, Masaoka's face is kind of like hardened and grisly. They don't even bother making him look younger there, because Ginoza's probably like, what, 9? It was the old type that used gunpowder. He gave me this forced smile and said, it's a secret, okay? And this kind of would go back around to the time where he was talking about how he wasn't happy that they were making him use the Dominators, and he was probably trying to have... I mean, you kind of have this old cop mentality of Masaoka being like, I didn't like the fact that they were forcing me to use this gun that stripped me of my own judgment on what was right and wrong, so I was probably going to carry this gun with me to use in case if I needed it. And it's like, okay. It's a secret, okay? At the time, I felt proud to share a secret with my father. Yeah, and he's like, that was... And then we go back to the present with him putting the glasses on. I don't know whether it really happened or not. It's so funny, like, memories you have as a kid, because, you know, there's lots of memories I've had as a child that I think back on, I'm like, did that actually happen? Or was that just me thinking it happened? Or, like, dream and reality mixing together. Because when you're a kid, reality and stuff that's in your head can sometimes get confused, right? So, interesting. He's like, I don't know if it really happened or if it was just made up. But he grows that hair out so you don't tell. He's like, still, the fact of the matter is, it was a special day for me. So, we have this one guy. This guy, it looks like a Nobuchika Ginoza. Yep, he has a group in the group. His It's medium blue. 3 weeks ago it was dark cyan. So it looks on there that 6 weeks ago it was light sea green, 75.8. 3 weeks ago it was dark cyan, 79.2. And today, 3 weeks later, it's 86.3. So it keeps going up, his psychopaths. And you can kind of see at the bottom there, it's like made a significant jump in September. So over the last 5 months, that spike has been enormous. Like it was 32 and 38 in September, and now it's 86. So I'm guessing around September is around the time that Akane joined the force. I'm gonna guess that was around that time that all this happened. But yeah, it shows that like everything was doing fine, and in the last 5 months it's made a significant jump, which is problematic. And so he's like, your crime coefficient went up by 7 points. We can't ignore this number. If it gets worse, I'll have to report it. And so he's like, I've been trying to manage my stress by using therapeutic devices. And he's like, oh, well, and here's the thing that's so funny is that the therapist is like, oh, well, yeah, you can use like you can take an edible or something. But, you know, have you ever tried talking to your family? Ginoza's like, my family's the problem. So that is really sad, though, because he can't really talk to anybody. Ginoza, his best friend, is now an enforcer. His dad is an enforcer. He's concerned about his young colleague that could be going down the same road, but isn't. And everyone else he's surrounded by are enforcers, except for the chief, who is probably putting stress on him even more. So it's like, he really doesn't have anybody he can talk to or a girlfriend. So it's like, it's why he's talking to the therapist. And the therapist's like, well, I'm doing all we can, but it's not seeming to work. So, and then Masaoka kind of tells him like a possible solution later on. But for right now, it's like, not going to work. And then I like the idea that the nice, pretty vision outside is just another hologram. It's not real. But I don't know, this therapist with the little Chris Takagawa little sprig coming down, does he seem suspicious to anybody? He seems a little suspicious to me. Probably not. He looks a little bit like Senguji, so maybe that's why I'm thinking he looks a little suspicious. He's probably fine. But interesting. He's like, why don't you talk to him? If you don't have any particular reason why not to. He looks sus. I don't know. I don't know what to feel. This entire series makes me suspect of everybody. And he's like, there is a problem. There's a reason why I can't talk to him. And he has that little smile like, I can't really do much about it. So I'm glad that this series has been pointing out Ginoza's rising crime coefficient and his rising psychopath hue and talking about it. I'm glad that it has brought it up and now it's come to the forefront. But with that being said, I'm glad that the show is bringing it up and offering a possible solution, which we'll talk about in a minute. I have a feeling we're going to go through this OP quite a bit. We'll probably see it too. I do want to make note, the only thing I want to note this time is that there's lots of the pink color pink, and it's tied to not only the smoke and the gasoline, but to Akane in general. So make that what you will. So let's cut back to the old lady doing the Rubik's Cube the chief doing the Rubik's Cube alongside Ginoza. I feel like this, I don't know, is the old chief related to Shogo? She calls him Shogo-kun. She calls him by his first name. What do we do with that? So we started this episode out with Ginoza and his father, who's Masaoka. And now we have at the end of the halfway point, which would have been the end of episode 13, we have the old lady and Shogo, and she calls him Shogo-kun. So either she is related to Shogo or she personally knows him and she's like tracking him down because of that reason. Don't know, right? But we're going to put that on our radar that the old lady may know Shogo. She called him Shogo-kun. Maybe, and the fact she said his first name and kun by it means that they have a personal relationship. So just going to file that away. File it away, shall we? So what is fascinating here is the talk about the Sibyl system, which we're going to bring up here. Because she kind of acknowledges, at first it seems like she's going to basically deny that anything is wrong. And she's like, everything is fine. Everything is going according to plan. But then she kind of reveals that, no, we know there's exceptions to the system, but no one else knows there's exceptions to the system. And no one is ever going to know that there's exceptions to the system because otherwise the system doesn't function. And it's like, Definitely Gendo vibes. Like old Chief, she gives off Neon Genesis Gendo vibes, but in a much more, I like her more than Gendo. I'll say that. I like her character more than I do to Gendo's from Neon Genesis. She's much more intriguing to me right now. But she questions, I like that she's very smart. She's very intelligent, and at first, with her eyes and everything look kind of like Shogo's. I'm like, are you like Shogo's mom? Can we have that? Can we have her be Shogo's mom? I really want it to be like he's just trying to he's just rebelling from his mother. Can we have that? But I like that she at first takes Ginoza's words and spits it right back at him. She's like, well, you said that she was causing problems and we should probably look into her. And now you're saying we should take her word over everything else. Interesting that you say that. And he's like, well, but I like that he's like, well, are you really going to do that to me now? As she's doing this Rubik's Cube. She's like, and he's like, well, she's not incompetent. She's like, well, you said she lacked experience. And he's like, well, and I like that he tries to spin it back around and says, well, if we're going to play that game, the Sibyl system said she had the aptitude to be in this situation. So are you denying the Sibyl system? And then she is like, hold my beer. Let me, excuse me and explain the system to you, sir. It's great because her eyes kind of narrow and she looks at him. She's like, are you really testing me, boy? Like, she just has that. She's like that mentality. And she's like, Ginoza, I think really highly of you. And I don't want you to become an enforcer like your father. So, and that's kind of the interesting thing is that you have Ginoza, whose father is a latent criminal. And he's trying not to have that happen to him. And then you have this woman who, if Shogo is related to her, she might be like, I'm trying to make sure that the system is kept in place and my relative, friend, son, protege, whatever relationship he has with her is trying to muck it up. Let's get him out of the way. That's rather interesting, right? And she goes into this big, long old spiel about how the world has stabilized thanks to the Sibyl system. She's like, and that's when she solves the Rubik's Cube. And she's like, look, everything has been solved by this Sibyl system. And everybody's lives are made better because they don't have to worry about what to do anymore. Everything is on the path towards universal peace. So I liked what I was trying to say in the reaction is I liked that in the first episode we meet her, she's in doing the Gendo style at the desk in this position of power, and she's sitting down making Ginoza stand up before her. When we start this scene, they're both sitting down facing each other almost as equals, but by the time we move back to the desk, we're back to square one where she's like, okay, I had this talk with you, we talked on equal terms, but now I'm going to show you that I am the head authority here and I have final say, so deal with that. And she's like, planning one's life. When people make choices, no matter what they are, they ask for judgment rather than agonizing over it. It's just basically it's lazy. It's having somebody do the work for you. And that's what she says. That's kind of the society, but it's made this universal happiness for the most people. So we have to do something that's unprecedented in history, and no mistakes are allowed. That is the ideal. If the system is absolutely perfect, it shouldn't even require humans to operate it. I really like this part here that she talks about, because she tells Ginoza, she's like, look, she pulls back the Oz curtain and says, I know the system's not perfect. That's why you're here. So she's kind of saying, the Sibyl system, it's all about an illusion of perfection. It's not real. She's like, if the Sibyl system was perfect, you wouldn't have a job. We would just arm the drones and have them do the work, and you all wouldn't be needed. Which is a terrifying concept. The idea of just the drones being automated and having the guns. That's terrifying, right? And she even acknowledges that there are errors, glitches, and circumstances that the technology cannot account for. She's like, we get it's not really a perfect system, but that's why we have the inspectors, that's why we have the enforcers, and that's why we have the bureau. So she's like, you all, the inspectors and the enforcers, you all make sure that when there are glitches in the system, when there are things that can't be explained, when there are things that could be damaging to the public, that you are the worker ants who go out and fix those things. And you are invaluable to us. We know that we couldn't do this without you, so that's why you're here. However, the whole point is that we maintain this illusion of perfection. We maintain this facade that everything's running smoothly, because if the public finds out it's not running smoothly, they're going to panic and everything will start to fall apart. And then there's no point of the Sibyl system being in existence, which is kind of what Makishima's goal is. Makishima's goal is to like just dismantle the system and prove that it's not even needed, right? Which we'll talk about in this. But she basically alludes to the fact that if there is a problem with the system, it will be dealt with. And how it is dealt with is none of your business. And that's kind of the terrifying thing, is that she's like, don't worry, we'll take care of it. That's terrifying. The fact that she's establishing that there's the bureau and there's the enforcers and inspectors, there's levels above them they don't even know about. And that they're like, oh, okay. And she's like, you don't have to worry about that. Don't even, she's like, I'm going to share with you some information to let you know what I'm talking about. And so she shares the fact that they caught Toma. They found him. He was missing and they got him, right? They got him. He was missing. And Ginoza's like, oh my God. And she's basically alludes to the fact that he was exactly like Shogo. His crime coefficient didn't go down. And she alludes to the fact too that he's not alone. There are 1 in 2 million, which doesn't seem, that seems like very little, but the fact of the matter is, if we, let me say here, if we took, and again, I've got to get my calculator and do the math here. If we had 7 billion people on Earth, let's say there's 7 billion people. 7 billion people divided by 2 million. There is 3,500 people in the world that are not affected by the Dominator. That's their psychopath doesn't show up. 3,500 people is a lot. That's enough to do something. So that doesn't seem like a lot. When she said 1 in 2 million, I'm like, oh, that's not as uncommon as it seems. That's 3,500 people in the world that could easily get away from the psychopaths detecting them. That could be a problem if they all got together, right? So that's interesting to me. So the idea that Akane could be one of them is not surprising to me. I think she's one of them. I think Akane is like Shogo and Toma. I think her psychopath hue is not affected. She just hasn't realized it yet. But I think Shogo obviously has realized it. I think Toma realized it, and they were able to weaponize that to use against the Sibyl system. Now, she alludes to the fact that they got a hold of Toma, and she's like, oh, well, he's gone now. And at first, Ginoza's like, well, where'd he go? And she's like, he just disappeared. Now, did she mean that he just disappeared, as in he got away and they can't find him anymore and Shogo killed him? Or is she saying he just disappeared, he's not with us anymore, don't worry about it, don't ask questions? She basically alludes to the fact they took care of him and he's not going to be an issue anymore. And she's like, Division 2 found him and they're under a gag order. And she's like, he basically is he's an asymptomatic person, a crime asymptomatic, which is hilarious. But I think that Akane is one of the ones too that is asymptomatic as well. She's like, it's estimated that this happens in about 1 out of every 2 million people, which is not as uncommon as it may seem. And she's like, we had a lot of difficulty with that case. And they're like, I do not intend to say any more on the matter to you, and you don't need to say anything about it to anyone either. All that matters is the fact that no one will ever fall victim to his crimes again. And I like that Ginoza is like, So, I mean, safe to say he's no longer with us. Now, the question is, did they do experiments on him? Did they take apart his brain to try to figure out how this works? What did they do to him? We don't know. And that's almost as scary as her telling us, is that we have to imagine now, well, what could they have done with him? We don't know. But she's like, his case didn't reveal a blind spot in the Sibyl system and didn't shake the credibility, and neither will this one, right? So she puts out this point of saying, you guys have now reached the tail end of the system. You've seen it front to back. you've seen the possible errors that are within it, and you know that it has to keep going. Otherwise, this society that we've been building up all this time is going to crumble, and we can't have that. So she's like, you've seen it at its worst, so now you know, and now you're going to do stuff to prevent it from happening again, right? Thanks. And that's pretty much where she leaves it at, and he's like, okay. Do you understand? And Ginoza's like, yeah. But she puts a lot of pressure on him. She's like, she puts a lot of pressure because she says that they want to capture Shogo alive and bring him to the bureau, which is terrifying. But she basically says, like, you know, she puts all this pressure on Ginoza to say not only can he not talk to his fellow teammates about the fact that Tomo was captured and tell them what happened, he can't do that, but he also has to try to, like, get Shogo alive, which seems very difficult. And on top of that, he also has to do all of this and bring him in without telling anybody about it. And we've established in this episode that Ginoza is having a lot of trouble because he's not able to talk to people about all these things. He's bottling up all this turmoil, his crime coefficient's going up, and he has a lot of stress and he doesn't know what to deal with. So it seems like a recipe for disaster for Ginoza, and I'm not going to be surprised if he falls prey to it, right? Because he's not telling Masaoka about his crime coefficient going up, so what do we do? But she wants him alive. She's like, we're going to make sure he's not going to threaten society again, just like Tomo will never threaten society again. Yeah, they got rid of him. So anyway, so we're going to talk about the book club. Let's talk about Shogo's book club. And the first book on our list is not one that Shogo picked out, but it is one that Kogami is reading called Heart of Darkness by Heart of Darkness is, I know it's Conrad, but it's Joseph Conrad. There we go. I feel like Shogo would look at Kogami's pick for the book club and be like, what a pedestrian read. Because Shogo's two books are pretty, like, off the wall. But Heart of Darkness, I've actually read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I had to read it in college. It's fine. Wouldn't exactly call it a fun read. It's actually pretty disturbing and dark. It's dark as hell, which it's called Heart of Darkness, you would imagine. But the main overall themes talk about colonialism and the concept of savagery. So it actually makes sense that Kogami is reading it. One of the biggest themes of the story that Conrad points out is that people try to distinguish themselves from others, and using colonialism, they try to, like, make the savages seem less cultured and less civilized and less human, when the reality is the people in the story that are colonizing and putting these other people into slavery are just as monstrous as the people they're claiming are savages and monsters. That's kind of the point. It's like, it's the irony that the people condemning these individuals as being quote unquote savage are monstrous themselves, maybe even worse. So that kind of seems to fit the theme of this series, where we have this idea of Shogo who passes himself off as being this, like, just posh, prim and proper, you know, British villain, but he's as monstrous as they come. So I find it interesting. It seems very thematic that Kogami's reading it. I like that Akane's like, oh, you're reading a book. I thought you just worked out. So that's nice. You're a man of culture, I see. How good. But Akane is surprisingly okay throughout all of this. She's fine. I did not anticipate her being okay like this, which is very fascinating and very like Shogo. I think it's hilarious to me that Shogo is all up on Kogami, believing that they are like kindred spirits, when I'm like, no, Shogo, you should be paying more attention to Akane again, because she's actually quite like you. She's just a sweet summer child when you are not. So I'm going to be curious to see if Akane, as she develops in the series, if Shogo starts to notice her and starts to realize, oh, maybe I should have taken a closer look at you, or if that's going to be his undoing, not taking the closer look at her and realizing that she is just as dangerous as he is. Because she is. She, like, her Q was not hardly cloud at all, and Kogami's like, are you okay? Are you fine? And she's like, yeah, I took some time off with the funeral, but I'm okay. And I'm like, she has got some repressed trauma, or she's handling it rather effectively. Something I thought was really interesting in this too is the idea that at the funeral, the little pictures of them at the funeral, they move. I thought that was, like, it's tacky, but it makes sense in the future, and that's so weird to me that they just have the moving funeral photo, and then of course they have a closed casket and then they cremate her. And so she apologizes for not getting Shogo, and he's like, well, it's not your fault. It was the fact the Dominator wasn't working. And he's like, they're trying to successfully outwit us who solely rely on the Dominators. And she's like, well, Shogo killed your friend and my friend too, so I'm not going to let him get away. She's like, there's one thing that I'm glad about, and that he really exists, so people aren't going to think that you're crazy and they won't doubt you anymore. We can finally pursue the same goal together. I love how just like serious she is in this moment. She's like, we're going to get him, right? We're going to go after him and get him. What's so fascinating is last episode I talked about how her and Kogami are pretty similar and that they are on similar pathways. What's fascinating about this is that Akane and Kogami have both now gone through the same incident, but for her, Kogami kind of spiraled, or so we've been told. He spiraled and got to the point where his crime coefficient went up so much that it wouldn't go back down, and he kind of got into the state that he's in. But Akane, not only is her crime coefficient not going up, but she's handling this with extreme calm, cool collectedness that Kogami's like, you're doing a memory scoop? You're doing this? Aren't you worried? And she's like, no, we just got to do this thing. And I don't know if it's the fact that she has Kogami to kind of like align herself with that's keeping her anchored, or if that's just how she is, but it's fascinating to watch and see how she's handling it different than him. And he's kind of like, doesn't know what to do about this. And so they talk about the photo fit picture, and Kagari tells him about it, and Kogami is very against this. And I think it's very sweet. I think it's very sweet and a kind gesture that Kogami's like, I don't want her reliving those bad memories, because he obviously knows how that feels, and he knows how horrible that situation is, seeing someone you care about being killed in front of your eyes. And he's like, I don't want her to re-experience that. And I'm like, that's so good. But she's like, I'm gonna do it anyway. She's so stubborn. And the thing about it is, I'm very glad that the memory scoop is just taking a photo from your memory and not erasing a memory. Because when they said memory scoop, I thought it was going to be they were going to erase her memories of her friend dying. And I was like, oh, I'm very much against like memory altering narratives. I'm like, no. So I'm glad that wasn't the case. I'm like, oh, thank God we're not going that route. But yeah, she decides to do it. And even Kagari and the others aren't happy about it. But she's like, nope, I'm going to do this. Like Ginoza and Shion seem like a little bit on edge about it. And she's like, we need this to get the investigation. And she's like, my only strength is that my psychopath doesn't get clouded easily. And I'm like, girl, that's not your only strength. I feel like she underestimates herself a lot. And I'm like, girl, your only strength is not that. Like, you should not think that. But I feel bad. I was waiting for them to tell her that wasn't her only strength, but they're all like so against it that they're like, fine, whatever. And then Shion's like, all right, everything's set. And then she manages to get, one thing I thought was really cool about this was that it like interacts and like merges the memories of Funakawa together along with that moment. So it wasn't just like her reliving the moment entirely. It was also like reliving her memories with her, which in theory could amplify that emotional, that emotional stress even more. But for her, like, Ginoza punches her across the face and she's fine. Like, she snaps out of it, but she got the image. And then there it is. He's like, are you okay? And they're like, it was successful. And her psychopath, 34.7. Yeah. Like, it is hardly changed at all. Yeah, that's really low. So they're like, And Ginoza's like, you would go that far for this case? And she's like, yeah, I would. And I think that's something interesting that we've talked about, like the links that Shogo will go to enact these crimes. And now we're seeing the links that Akane will go to help Kogami and them catch Shogo. So I think that that's important to keep track of, especially alongside Kogami. And Kogami is just like, he's not happy all this has been taking place, but they're like, no, Kagari and Kunozuka are like, it managed to work, and they have the picture of Shogo. It's like the most pretentious picture of him too. He's just like looking down on them. It's like the most pretentious image of him, and Kogami just getting visibly angry seeing him, like seeing that it's him. Like you could just see his fist clenched. Like Kogami is so emotional, and Akane, for being as driven as she is not nearly, I think, as emotive as Kogami is. So that's fascinating. And they find out that he's the one responsible for Spooky Boogie's death, all of this. So we go to Masaoka out on the balcony with Ginoza, because we of course need to like come back to this and talk about this. And Ginoza's like, look, I want to find out, why is Akane's psychopath not changing? Why doesn't her hue get clouded? How does she manage her stress? And Ginoza's not only answering... It's funny that Ginoza's asking his father this, because it's not that his father knows the answer, but Ginoza's also like trying to follow the psychiatrist's advice. And he's also like, it would make sense he'd want to know why she can control her hue, because he's having problems himself. And if his dad has any insight into that, he's like, I want to know. And I like that Masaoka's like, well, why are you asking me about this? He's like, you're closer to her than me, aren't you? Which is funny because, you know, at the start of this, Ginoza and her were like the two colleagues interacting with the enforcers. And now Ginoza's going to Masaoka because he thinks that they're closer than he is to her. So, and he's like, I don't have the answer about little Missy. Like he calls her Missy. He's like, one thing I can say clearly is that she isn't afraid of her crime coefficient at all. And here's the thing. So, things that we know about Akane. She is not afraid of the crime coefficient. And she gets over emotional moments almost clinically. Again, that seems like Shogo, right? That seems a lot like Shogo, because Shogo's not afraid of the coefficient. He's like, I've beat the system. I've cracked the code. She's not afraid of it all. She is, how should I put it? She accepts things as they are. And that's the thing. It's kind of like a kind of a reverse psychology, a placebo effect, where I feel like once Shogo realized that his crime coefficient wasn't going to be affected by his actions, once he realized that, it was like a psychoschematic thing where it wasn't altered. And with her, when she, you know, she's been told all this time that her hue doesn't get clouded easily, so it's kind of just become part of her. She's just not worried about it. She's like, oh, I'll be fine. My crime coefficient doesn't go up. I'll be all right. And because she doesn't think it will go up, she forgives society, acknowledges it, and accepts it. Now, there are some interesting details that are a little bit different from Shogo. The idea that she forgives, acknowledges, and accepts. I think that Shogo perhaps is like, you know, forgive and forget, you know. I feel like Shogo doesn't really care about what people do against him. The difference is he kills them. And she just lets him go. He acknowledges the way that society is. But the thing of it is, Shogo does not accept it. Shogo is wanting to drastically change it. Whereas Akane is just like, no, that's the way that things are. What do we do about it? Very interesting. And then I like that you see the two of them. What's so nice is that you see the two of them standing on the balcony, and down below them, there are two arrows pointing in different directions. One arrow with Masaoka's pointing one way, and one arrow with Ginoza's pointing the other way. She doesn't mind taking risks. So it's not like she's just going with the flow. So I like this. She takes risks. She takes risks and does not go with the flow. Shogo takes risks too, but he seems very calculated. So interesting, right? Interesting, those similarities. She probably believes in the meaning and the value of being a detective unquestioningly. Masaoka thinks so highly of Akane. I love it. She's like his adoptive daughter. I feel like Masaoka is like her adoptive dad. He's so proud of her. He loves how much she's a detective. And the thing about it is, I feel like Ginoza, I'm not saying Ginoza feels jealous or anything, but I think there's a part of Ginoza that is looking at his father talking about Akane and how she's such a great detective, and he's probably thinking, well, what does that make me? I'm not a detective like that, so my chopped liver or something. Are you saying that your case was different? And he's like, me? Oh, well. He's like, though I'm like this now, I feel I had her same belief in justice long ago. Mm-hmm. And then I like the way that Ginoza just kind of smiles looking at him, being like, see, you were kind of like her. Like, there is a little smile on his face when he looks over at his dad. Like, just knowing, I think he knows, he remembers his father, like, the man that showed him the gun as a kid. Like, that had that sense of justice. But he's kind of like, well, what ended up happening? Because he smiles at him. He says, but one day I was given a gun that speaks. And I was told from then on that I had to shoot when it told me to. And that's when the smile fades from Ginoza's face, because Masaoka's saying, you know, I had this sense of justice and the Sibyl system kind of took it away from me. He's like, I wasn't able to do my job anymore. And he couldn't take it. It didn't set with him well. In order to capture or kill people, it told me what to do. And I was angry. That it wasn't the detective work I believed in. Yeah, he's like, I couldn't do my job, and it wasn't the justice that I thought it was. And he's like, the more I felt that way, the more my psychopaths got clouded. And it shows, and he kind of clenches his fist there, and we see he has the metal arm, like he's lost his arm, right? But he's like, well, now it's stabilized, so... And Ginoza's like, well, if you question that much, why didn't you just quit? And he's like, and that's kind of a rhetorical question, because it's like, well, by then, at that point, the Sibyl system's like, what else do you want to do? You know, he's like, why didn't you just quit and why didn't you quit becoming a detective? You made Mom and I pay the price when you didn't even want to live that way. He says, damn you. How dare you whine about it now? And the thing about it is Masaoka doesn't get mad at him. Masaoka doesn't say, no, you're wrong. He's like, no. He's like, you're right. That's how it was. And while I keep saying I don't like it, I'm still a detective even now. He's like, old habits die hard. You denied Sibyl and Sibyl denied you. And he's like, yeah. He's like, and Ginoza's like, you know, you were just this old hat. You couldn't adapt with the times. Ginoza's like, you couldn't have just adapted and moved forward. He's like, you had to be stubborn and set in your ways. And it caused my mother and I to suffer while you were just, you know, you didn't even quit being a detective, right? He's like, you just kept doing it and dragging people with you. He's like, I might have been wrong. But he's like, around that time I accepted everything and came to terms with it, then it was too late. I was already enforcer, and I couldn't do anything else about it. It was a little more than too late. And he's like, what about you? Have you been able to maintain a nice and clear color on your psychopaths? And Ginoza's like, you don't need to worry about it. And I'm like, that's basically telling your dad that it's a problem. I'm like, you're basically telling your dad it's an issue. Are you trying to act like a father now? It's like, yeah. And so, and I like that Masaoka's like, look, you're bringing the father-son bit into this. I'm just acting as a subordinate worried about his boss. One who's due for a promotion. I feel like Masaoka wants Ginoza to get promoted. He wants him to get out of that division and to leave him alone. I feel like there's a part of Masaoka that wants him to move on and not worry about him because he's his dad. But Ginoza just can't do it. And it's like, ugh. It's like you were saying earlier, if you question your job, then you start feeling something is amiss and you should be careful. I like that Masaoka, as a dad, he's very hands-off with Ginoza because he knows that Ginoza's an adult and can do his own thing. But at the same time, he kind of like does what he does with Akane. And he's like, look, I'm just telling you, eat your own words. He's like, you're the one, you're telling people to be careful. You're getting too involved. You're thinking about it too much. And it's going to cause you problems later. I'm just telling you. Oh, man. I love their dynamic so much. He's like, don't fall into the same pitfall that I fell into. He's like, I don't want you to become an enforcer like me. I want you to get promoted and get out of here. I love their dynamic. I love their relationship. I love that they're father and son. It makes me worried that Masaoka... I've been worried Masaoka's going to die this whole series because he's the older mentor character. I'm like, I don't want him to die, but I worry about him. And now that we know that him and Ginoza are father and son, and it's official, it's like... But maybe they'll be fine. Who knows? But yeah. So anyway, we cut to back to the tower late at night, and we see the old woman, and she's sitting creepily in her chair in the dark, mind you. In the dark, and she's sitting there at the chair, not moving, and they do this weird scan of her. And so what is it doing here? It's like, what does it say here? It's all this information that's like coded here. And she's just at the chair while stuff is passing through. Is she a robot? What is happening? And then we see, and she's looking, or is she looking at all the data and looking at Shogo and not moving? What? Because then she sees it. And she blinks. Okay. You've been identified. You're at the end of your rope, Shogo-kun. Huh. So, is she... it was really creepy that she was just sitting there like a robot, like while all this data was analyzing. I'm like, is she a robot? Does she know about... Is she like Senguji, where she's like put a soul into a fake body? Is this happening? Is this a thing? Don't tell me. But she could be like Senguji and be a cyborg. I don't know. I don't know. So anyway, we had this chess game between Cho and Shogo, who Cho did not sound like he normally does. His voice actor did not sound as Zekish as he normally does. So I was like, is this the same one? But they're playing this game of chess. And he's like, I'm surprised. And he has the white knight. He puts the white knight down as the first piece there. And so he says, well, that guy, I'm wondering if he's worthy of your help. So they're basically talking about the guy that wanted to assault the woman. And so we have the two, I like that we have the black and white knights facing each other. So and they knock over the pawn. So he's like, I'm wondering if that guy is worthy of your help. So again, like going back to the Mito situation. And he's like, a pawn you can freely control. And of course, that's the pawn that we hit. Just by redirecting his desires. Yeah, so we're talking about what we're going to do with him. Is nice and convenient. Yeah. And he's like, what? And of course, Shogo's like, well, what are human desires? I'm like, oh my God, he's got his pumpkin spice latte, his tour guide from the Louvre. He's ready to teach you French. It's just like, Shogo. What are human desires? And he says, what I think is most troublesome, the most troublesome desire is the desire for attention. Because yeah, so far he's like, it's a source of jealousy and relationship problems. He's like, just don't desire relationships. It's fine. Just be asexual like me and you're good. What I like about it is that Shogo's not too far off the mark, because so far everybody that's been caught by our enforcer team are people whose desires or their need for attention got in the way. It was the idea like people seeking attention or seeking to get a specific person and being like honed in on something. That's what's caused them to get caught. And Shogo's like, that's the problem here. Then he says, one thing he brings up, he's like, you don't, because Cho's like, well, you don't seem to have that problem. And I like that we just see his eyes. I like that we just see Shogo's eyes as he's playing the chess game. He's like, I pride myself on having almost no desire for that. He's like, I wonder if that's the key to me controlling his crime coefficient. So he doesn't let his desire get out of whack. He doesn't have any like outward desires, which is funny because we've seen him slowly take an interest in Kogami, but he seems like he's keeping it under control for right now. And then he says, have you read The Conquest of Happiness by Russell? And Cho's like, no, I haven't read any of your book club books. What are you talking about? Come on now. I'm a gamer, a hacker. He says the opposite of boredom is not pleasure, but excitement. People will gladly seek out any kind of excitement, even if it's pain. Yeah, it's like thrill seeking. It's like when people get tattoos that are painful, but there's people that do that, people that get like a rush out of skydiving, people that like, you know, are into BDSM stuff. Like he's just like, you know, basically it's like even if it's pain, it's excitement, and people will seek that out from having the monotonous and boring happen. Right? He's like, you get it, don't you? The Sibyl system is the very definition of boredom. Yeah, which is true, right? And that's me just checkmate on him. Now, okay, question. How did he get the knight, how did he get the rook over in front of the queen or the king? Because the rook has to come from, the only way the rook could have been put in that position is if it came from the left. So I'm assuming that's what happened. Because otherwise I'm like, how'd you make that move, Shogo? How'd you do that chess move? And Sho's like, oh, well, shit. I lost chess. And he's like, okay, now the plan has started. He's like, okay, see you later, bestie. Come back and play chess later. Okay, somehow the rook had to have gotten over. How did he beat him? Wait a minute. How? No, there is no way that was logistically done. If you guys pull up the episode, there had to have been 2 moves that had to have been made for Shogo to get into that position. One move was to move the rook over in like 2 spaces from the king. But if he had done that, the queen was right there to take him out. So either Cho like sucks at chess so bad and didn't realize his queen could just take out the rook in that move, or Shogo cheated. Because there's no way that could have made, there's no way that's possible. Even if he moved the rook over where he had to move across, the queen could have just taken him out automatically. So Show. I'm going to say that Cho sucks at chess. Because I was like, I could have beat Shogo in that move. Let's be real. So then we have the guy coming in the Sibyl system and takes out the people with the pair of scissors and the pin. I'm not going to rewatch that part because it was disgusting. But the point of it was that he ended up taking them out. And the reason why, I like the twist on the helmet. I like the twist in the helmet that it's not clouding the psychopath's hue, which is interesting. It's not that, but it's the fact that not only is it's not blocking the psychopath's hue, but it's copying it from someone nearby. Now it makes sense in episode 1, because in episode 1, Kogami like shot one of those people with the helmets through the window before he met up with Makishima. Well, if Makishima was near the guy with the helmet, they could just copy his hue, and that's why the coefficient wasn't working. Okay, makes sense. Got it. That all makes sense now. Cool. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the Conquest of Happiness. Conquest of Happiness. There's some things that are kind of interesting about this, because in the Conquest of Happiness, which is by Russell, there are 4 main maxims that are kind of pointed out in the text itself. So one is that motivations are not as altruistic as they seem to you. So the motivations that people have to do any actions are not necessarily unselfish, or they're not necessarily just as, they're not as innocent as they may seem to you. The second thing was, don't overestimate your own merits. So don't think that you're better than other people, because that could lead you to have some problems down the road. Don't expect others to take as much interest in you as you do. So don't think that people are as obsessed with you as you are of yourself, right? Which is life lessons. But then don't expect people to have any desire to persecute you. What's interesting is that in several of the crimes that have happened so far, there have been these things happen. And I feel like Shogo's reading them to try to make it to where he doesn't fall into these same pratfalls that other people do, right? And then if you look on the Conquest of Happiness, there's a line in there about boredom from Bertrand Russell. It says, boredom is therefore a vital problem for the moralist, since at least half of the sins of mankind are caused by fear of it. That part's really interesting, because he talks about how the Sibyl system is boredom itself. But this quote by Russell is saying that half of the sins of mankind are caused by people's fear of the Sibyl system, which I guess tracks with people being scared about their psychopath's hue getting clouded. So imagine that. But that book is really interesting. And then there's another book that is brought up with Shogo later on, where he's sitting on the couch reading it. And the book itself is called A Revolution Sabotaged Before It Began by Yasumi Iwakami. And Yasumi Iwakami is a journalist now who grew up in the 1950s. They're still alive today. And the book, A Revolution Sabotaged Before It Began, there's not an English translation, sadly. It's in Japanese. But it is about the fall of the Soviet Union. So, again, I think that a lot of the stuff Shogo is talking about in this episode are all things tied to him trying to not self-sabotage what is going down. Because there's been a lot of near catchings in the last episode. Like, up until now, there's been lots of near misses where Shogo's been very close to being captured and has barely been able to escape. And so I feel like at this point, Shogo is trying to make sure that he takes enough precautions and enough steps and gets rid of the evidence along the way so that it can't lead back to him, because he knows that now there's a very good chance that people are getting closer and closer to him. So take that for what it's worth, right? Take it for what it's worth. So yeah, the helmet is interesting. The helmet copying the psychopaths of somebody nearby. In this case, it copies the psychopaths of people surrounding them, not only with the demonstration in the streets, but also later on. That does make it very interesting to see what's going to go down, because they point out that Akane can't be near them if they're going after people with the helmets. So I don't know what that's going to do with her character, if that's going to make it to where she can't be as active in the series, or what do we do about that? So that's going to be fascinating to see what goes down because of her not being able to be close when they're trying to track someone down. What are we going to do about that? And then I like the little cleaner robots. They're just like cleaning up the pencil and stuff very clinically and grossly. I'm like, They make note about the scanners, right? They make note about the cameras and how the cameras aren't noticing anything, right? I don't like the idea that Shogo has taken a bunch of the cameras to tamper with, and the fact that Cho is a hacker and a tech guy. That seems like they're going to be doing some stuff that... Because Kunazuka makes a point in this episode. Kunazuka's like, well, no, they can't tamper with the evidence. They can't tamper with the cameras. They can't do this and can't do that. And I'm like, well, you say that. You say they can't tamper with it. So I'm like, is that going to lead to a twist later on where Shogo and Cho find a way to tamper with the cameras and make it to where they're able to hack into it? I don't know. This whole thing, though, with getting the guy who found her and just, like, beat her with the hammer in front of the people in the streets and, like, tears her clothes off and assaults her is disturbing on a number of levels, but it is, like, comically disturbing because the people are just standing there like, oh, look at that. Oh, my God, what was happening? And I like that Akane kind of takes, like, when Masaoka was talking about the acknowledging, accepting of society, Akane kind of takes a very interesting approach with that scenario because it's disturbing. Nobody's affected watching this woman get beat to death. Nobody does anything while she's sitting there just getting killed. Everybody's just like, oh, that's weird. And nobody calls it out, right? And to the point where the robots are convinced that she's the problem. They're like, you seem rather stressed, ma'am, as she's getting killed. It's freaking terrifying. But Akane makes a big point. She's like, look, because she's gone through the same situation now. She's like, when someone's killed in front of you, oftentimes you don't know how to react. You're just in a state of shock. And Akane's approach and interpretation of that scene is very optimistic and very much like, oh, well, they were all just in shock. You know, they just didn't know how to react. Looking at the scene, it's like they may have been in shock, but they almost seem disinterested more than in shock. So it's like, what the fudge? It's messed up. It's really messed up. It's really messed up. But yeah, they're like, we should take you to a medical facility immediately. We want to help everyone have a healthy life, as she's literally just killed. And Cho's like, this is brutal and messed up stuff. I'm like, for somebody that doesn't like violence, Cho is willing to do the job of taking the videos needed. And so Ginoza and Akane have this like talk in the car on the way there where they talk about how people used to lock their doors because of doubt. And doubting others was the basis for maintaining order. And Akane is like, is this one of Mr. Masaoka's stories from the past? And I'm like, the idea that locking doors is a story from the past. And the idea that Mr. Masaoka talking in the past, the fact that she doesn't know it's Ginoza's dad, he's like, yeah, it's one of the old man's stories. Like, not acknowledging it. He's like, we don't have to prepare ourselves to doubt or be cautious about others anymore. So he's like, you know that strangers are all good citizens. So it's like you just walk the streets not thinking anything bad is going to happen. And now these helmets are going to shake up the system. Like the idea, and I like that Shion's just like, this is some messed up stuff. I'm just saying. But Shogo, his whole goal to tear down the establishment is like, this is the society that Sibyl system has created, and it's boring and draining humanity of itself. So we're going to introduce a little anarchy back into the system. He's like the Joker from Dark Knight. He's like, we're going to create some chaos and, you know, put some anarchy back in the system. And it basically is like the discussion between Harvey Dent and the Joker in the Dark Knight, where he's like, you know, there's always a plan. Everybody has their own plans. And it's like the Sibyl system has kind of made that a universal thing. And now we're going to deconstruct it, right? We're going to bring it back to where people have to have doubt and have fear, right? And Kogami and Masaoka kind of have this same notion that that's where this is headed. And Kogami's like, what is crime in this world in the first place? And Masaoka's like, what are you thinking, Ko? He's like, this isn't an ordinary crime. It's something that shakes the very foundation of the system. Yeah. He's like, the idea is they're trying to tear the system back down and create chaos and make it to where everything's going to be a mess, right? A big old mess. Anyway, I like that, you know, Shogo's just sitting there with his little book and his little sweater being like, oh, my plan's going to fruition. What's interesting here is, okay, going back to that room. I want to go back to this room here. He's in with the couch, because it has like the same fireplace and seemingly the same windows and background that the therapist had with Ginoza. Is this just like a common choice that people can choose for their setting? Because yeah, that window setting and the fireplace looks exactly the same as the scene with the therapist at the very beginning, right? Yeah, it's very similar, only there's a red rug instead of a white rug, but it's like the same, the fireplace, the lights and everything. It looks a little different. It looks a little different, but not by much. Suspicious. Suspicious. I don't know. I'm a bit suspicious of it. I'm not going to lie. Now, Cho is the only one that knows the entirety of the plan. So, of course, Cho is... And now the question is Shogo lying? Is Cho the only person that knows the entirety of the plan? Does Cho know the entirety of the plan? Is Shogo lying just to lure Cho into a sense of security and stability like he has Senjuji and Oryu before him, right? Because Shogo has established he's not somebody to be trusted. He's very willing to manipulate the system if he needs to, and Cho seems to be rather trusting of him. I'm like, are you sure you should be doing that? I don't know. But they find Hiroko Fuji, the woman, and basically... I like that Kagari comments how weird it is that everybody just overlooked it, right? And they talk about how the normal value is maintained by the person throughout it. But Kogami cracks the code and notes how the psychopath level rises and how it goes down. And so then it goes back to Shogo and Cho being like, well, is somebody going to figure out the trick? And they're like, well, there's a possibility that's going to be figured out, but we've already taken steps to kind of get the plan in motion to be one step ahead of them, right? Okay, so the van that they attack, the van that they go after is one that says security. So yeah, they're getting into security systems, stuff they can hack. It's a problematic thing. Okay. They were armed with shop tools. Yeah, because they can't use the weaponry. That's the only weaponry they can use. Okay. And so I like that Shion isn't going to do the analysis for him. And then Kogami's like, but you're the best analysis person ever. And she's like, well, if you're going to flatter me, sure. I love it. And so then they find the guy, Ito, who had the obsession with her. And yeah, it's just like 7. Like just every creepy person's house with trash piled up everywhere. There are pictures of her all over. The mannequins all have like stuff stabbed into him. And then he manages to get out. But Kogami figures out the trick, and they're able to isolate him. And you know what? You know what? I think that it shows a lot of growth with Kogami, because at the very beginning of this series, when they were faced with latent criminals, the fact of the matter was that Kogami was willing to very much just kill them right off the bat. Even though Akane was like, no, we should paralyze him and try to take him in custody. And Kogami was like, no, we'll just go ahead and kill him. And here, Kogami realizes that this guy might have some pertinent information that could help them find Shogo. So he's like, let's not just kill him right off the bat. Let's save him and try to find some information out. So good on Kogami. Good on Kogami for not just automatically slaughtering him. Maybe Akane's having some positive influence on him. Maybe. Possibly. We'll see. But I like that. I like that they knock him out, and Masaoka's kind of surprised by it and is like, all right, fair enough. And then he's like, the thought of killing him did cross my mind. But then Akane shows up. I like it. He's like, the thought of killing the bastard did cross my mind. How do you feel about someone with your psychopath being shot? I'm glad that it didn't turn into an eliminator. And I like Masaoka kind of like smiles at him. He's like, look at you. And that's when Akane shows up. And she's like, oh, look at you. Now, Shogo faces off against these guys at the very end that very stupidly decide that they're going to kill Shogo now that they have like the security stuff. And I'm like, that was a terrible decision. And Shogo shows that he's not just talk. He actually has some moves, knows some martial arts skills, which is going to be it setting the stage that him and Kogami, who have both been shown to have martial arts skills, could have a hand-to-hand combat scene together. I'm just saying it could work out that way. Don't know if it's going to happen, but it's being set up. Who knew? And basically is not afraid to kill these guys. Nope. Because they got in the way, and he's like, they can't be trusted. What a terrible shame. Oh, and he just looks over there, like, just Shogo's like, just looks over at the devices and everything. Oof. And then we have our shoujo-esque ED to go back to. But yeah, this was a really great episode set. I liked this a lot. There wasn't as much to talk about, even though I've talked over an hour about it. But with that being said, I really appreciated it. I liked the plot twists that we got. I like the character development work they've had with Ginoza and Masaoka. I like Shogo's book club getting established. You should go check out these books if you want to. And then I like just the interesting little intrigue of what are we going to do about Akane? Where's her character going to go? What about Ginoza? His character is like under a lot of stress and pressure, so there's that. And then the relationship with Masaoka and him. And then just what does Shogo have planned? That's the big thing. What does Shogo have planned? What is he working on to try and push onto these inspectors and enforcers? So that's the question. I guess we'll find out, but who knows, right? So I'm curious to know your thoughts down below. I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Psychopaths. Bye!